So we have decided to title this presentation Surreal Impressions because we got the idea that there is something quite unique happening with these two case studies. I'm going to first begin by giving you an overlook of the agenda of our presentation. So I'm going to start by talking about deepfakes and synthetic media and trying to figure out what's the relevance of these technologies for the art museum in the digital age. As we will see, we've had two presentations right before this one that were very much online, and now we are somehow moving more into the on-site experience in the museum. Then we'll present two case studies, which are one in Florida, the other one in Paris, and highlight the use of technology in these two case studies, and then come to some main themes that we have found very interesting on the way in which this new media spark attention on the debate that it's already taking place with the use of many different media in the museum in the digital age. So deepfakes and synthetic media can be called contentious media. We are well aware that this media are not very much used in the museum scene. We haven't found many case studies aside from the ones we are presenting today, but there is definitely a wide use of this media in the visual sphere. And these media are problematic media insofar as they tackle questions like authenticity and the idea that a media product can be fake. So we believe that by being used inside museums, they are somewhat legitimated because museums have been functioning for centuries also as media producers and as places where the use of specific media, even problematic one, can be legitimated. So while deepfakes and synthetic media are not widely used, they are definitely part of a technology, generative AI, which is taking over the museum in many ways, as we have seen through these very interesting conference days. And there are definitely some issues, as I was saying before, that are already part of the debate with generative AI in the museum that are expanded when we look at deepfakes and synthetic media. Definitely, there is a question of authenticity, which is a very strong, important value within the museum environment. And the fact that with these cases, museums are producing content which only in some ways could be defined as authentic and showing them inside the museum alongside authentic artworks. It's already a complicated, interesting topic. Definitely, there is an interesting debate about the archive, digitizing the archive, but also displaying the archive inside the museum environment. And there is a question of visitor engagement because these technologies function as visitor interfaces. So they are definitely tackling an emotional aspect that is also very interesting. So before going into our case studies, there are a few examples that we can discuss. One is the case of the girl with the pearl earring and the Mona Lisa coming back to life. So this is a project from 2019. The Samsung AI Institute in Moscow ran this project where they animated these very famous paintings. And then the other case study is the next Rembrandt. So in 2016, so quite a while ago, an algorithm was fed a lot of data and information about Rembrandt paintings and became a perfect forger. So already in these two case studies, we can see how there is this use of technology that is calling upon some emotional aspects and the idea of authenticity. But that was then. Now we have a very much stronger technology, which is the deepfakes. So I guess most of you know what deepfakes are, but we can define them as videos that are the product of machine learning that merge and combine replacing superimposed images on video clips and creating a new fake video that appears authentic. And it appears authentic to our eye, usually to a non-expert look, but it also appears authentic to the algorithmic eye, which is an eye that has been used more and more in the cultural scenario to identify what's true and what's not. So deepfakes are used inside the Dalí Museum in Florida. This museum, it's a pretty recent museum. It was opened in 1982, but now it's housed in a new building that was built in 2011. And it's a museum that holds quite a big collection of Dalí artworks. It's 2,400 original artworks. And it's a museum that is very much engaged with technology. So the management of the museum believes that technology is not only something very important to use to create a meaningful museum and cultural experiences, but that also technology resonates with the character of Dalí. So Dalí himself was an early adopter of technology, and the narrative around the use of technology inside the museum is very much working on this idea of doing something that Dalí would have approved of. So in the museum, aside from the deepfake, there are already two other important investments in technological experiences. One is the Dalí Alive 360 degrees, and it's a huge dome that was built for this immersive experience, which is permanent at the museum. And it's an experience where graphics were built inside and outside the dome with elements from Dalí's artworks, but also from the story of his life and his writing. And the visitor can enter this space and have a look at this exciting immersive experience. The other example is the Dreams of Dalí, which is a VR experience where visitors can enter an artwork by Dalí and see it both from desktop, but also with the headset. So actually immerse themselves within the work. This was before the Dalí Lives experience came about. So Dalí Lives is a deepfake of Dalí that was created from original footage. It's composed of 125 very small videos that together come up to 45 minutes of new footage. And these videos are distributed around the museum on life-size screens. So visitors enter the museum, they walk around, and they get to see Dalí, who's there and is acting as a tour guide. He talks to them, he introduces them to information about the museum, about the visit, and gives them little tips on how to organize their stay. And interestingly enough, he can take a selfie with them, and then send it via email. So it's definitely a pretty interactive experience. And the narrative around this is that Dalí himself had said during his life, quotes like, I believe in death, but I don't believe in the death of Dalí. Or he had said, I cannot deprive humanity of my genius. It wouldn't be fair. So there is an idea in the building of the project that is very well documented, that this is attending Dalí's wishes. But certainly we can say that there are also problematic aspects to this experience. For once, the museum management says that the idea of creating this project is to create an emotional connection, because they claim that by being emotionally attached and surprised with the presence of Dalí, visitors are able to also create a connection with the artworks. Although we can definitely think that the interactive nature of this experience definitely fits into the logic of animating cultural objects, that it's now a widespread phenomena in the cultural sector, and marketing them as one-of-a-kind experiences, as Mihailova says. And the selfie aspect as well makes sure that the experience can fit and flow into cultural habits and ways of experience museum that are now practiced, and making sure that the museum experience can enter into the experience economy. So with this, I'm gonna pass the word to my colleague Jasmin. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Just do that. So we're moving now on to a case study called Bonjour Vincent. So last year at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, they installed this large touchscreen with Van Gogh's likeness that visitors could interact with by asking this image rendering questions about the painter's life and work, to which the image would then verbally respond. So a little bit of context about this. This generative AI algorithm is the product of a tech startup called Jumbo Mana. And it was done in collaboration with the art historian and the Van Gogh specialist Wouter van der Veen. It was first displayed at a big tech symposium called Viva Technology in Paris, before it entered into the museum assemblage at Musée d'Orsay as part of a larger exhibit on the artist. And much like the Dalí museum in Florida that we just heard about, this also includes a lot of other immersive experiences, most notably a virtual reality experience. So it does need to be noted that despite our title, unlike the Dalí, Bonjour Vincent is not really a true deepfake. It's obviously not a voice clone, and it's also not a visual replica. It's not based off photographic or filmic material. So unlike Dalí, unlike Dalí, Van Gogh was known to actively avoid being photographed. He claimed that the medium lacked life. There's only one confirmed image of the artist, which was taken when he was 19, which you should see on screen now. And I just quickly highlight this to kind of make the point that this mirrors some of the ethical issues, notably the issue of consent that we see around necrotechnologies and the death tech industry more generally. So Bonjour Vincent falls generally into this category of synthetic media. Contemporary invocations of synthetic media define it as data that is generated through artificial intelligence, and it's created either partially or wholly without using existing images, texts, or recordings from the so-called real world. So the data used to train the generative algorithm Bonjour Vincent includes about 900 letters that were written by the artist during the 1800s, alongside some early biographies that were approved by the art historian. This is the reason that it can't be positioned as wholly synthetic. Because of these letters, it does have a so-called real world referent with the texts, but this doesn't alter the synthetic audio of Van Gogh's voice, nor does it change the fact that the algorithm is combining data in ways to generate novel responses. So we see this particular case as falling into multiple categories of this umbrella term that is generative AI. So it's a synthetic voice generating novel responses through iterative machine learning. It's trained on an archive of text. It uses things like natural language processing technology to respond to visitors and so on. So next to the screen of Bonjour Vincent, you obviously probably, unless you have very good eyesight, can't see that. So I've enlarged the bit of text that I want to draw your attention to. It's this claim that's made to visitors that Van Gogh's answers will be faithful to the painter's habits and ideas. And I found this really interesting because this very much speaks to a language of computer science entering the museum around this attempt to reach what's called a ground truth of realism. So whereby data is taken from the wild and is therefore thought to be representative of the real. And we see this across a few different quotes that I've pulled here. It's kind of this classic narrative of more data equating to more accuracy, representativeness, and therefore more authenticity. So this idea that our focus is on enriching the database that comes from Jumbo Mana. And we also bear witness to proclamations of accuracy and authenticity, both from Jumbo Mana and also from the Musée d'Orsay, although it should be said, as you can hopefully see with this final quote on the screen here, that the Musée d'Orsay has shown slightly more skepticism when it comes to this idea of authenticity, what is real, what is synthetic, etc. And this is important because we know that when it comes to generative technology, data is flattened in order to be optimized for likeliness rather than likeness, which Hito Stale mentions in her work Mean Images. So in other words, the product's goal is to align with our expectations rather than to subvert them, even if the subversion is actually more aligned with what has unfolded. And so with this particular case, the product we get here is what has been deemed by programmers and art historians as most probable. This is a really important point to emphasize, I think, because it indicates how forms of synthetic media are inherently bound with cultural perception and cultural projection. And I think, excuse me, it's very early in the morning here, so my voice is still waking up. I think this is perhaps best explored when it comes to some of the perceived glitches in the operation of Bonjour Vincent. One of these was the response to the commonly asked question. Visitors very often said to Bonjour Vincent, why did you kill yourself? And some of these initial responses, like the first quote I've got on screen here, were deemed too morbid. And so the algorithm was consequently retrained to provide more hopeful messaging, as you see with the latter response on screen. These so-called glitches were positioned by museum staff as problems to be ironed out, so to speak. And in this, we see synthetic data being mobilized in a way that's not oriented towards probability, but to palatability. The ground truth of this process becomes the way that the museum is held to producing a particular narrative rather than fidelity to the data, let alone to the original. And this brings us to one of our core themes, as Anna said at the start, that of authenticity. So authenticity has always been a very fraught concept. It's got a complex and contested history, but historically it has been central to museums through a focus on things like provenance and so on. For this presentation, we take Kenderdine and Yip's perspective that authenticity is constructed through this trifecta of material concerns, digital mediation, and viewer perception. And we're going to explore these three across our final few slides now. So it's, of course, nothing new to use an apparatus, whether that apparatus is an archive or a machine algorithm or a machine algorithm being trained on an archive, to establish a rhetoric of objectivity and neutrality in how knowledge is produced. And we know that this is a flawed rhetoric. So when an archive using a data set to train is used as a data set to train the machine, it produces an iterative cycle of inclusion and exclusion, and decisions are always made around what should be archived and how. And there's always, therefore, kind of an inherent element of bias to the practice of archiving. And this can be compounded when it enters into the computational, as an algorithm requires that data points are weighted in order to establish value and therefore to be able to produce meaningful outputs. And as with anything that is digital, the potential for circulation and remix is extended. So Bonjour Vincent, for instance, it's a proprietary algorithm, and Jumbo Mana has plans to bring it to Amazon's Alexa. We're sticking within the museum installations. So one of the things that really interested us is how these displays shift focus from the artwork to the artist. And what we see in these cases of generative AI in the museum is an upending of how David Gunkel conceives of remix. So as opposed to the quote on screen here, and this shift away from the romantic notion of the artist as genius, museums are really mobilizing remix and these technologies in order to re-invoke this ideal. And there's been this tendency in this field to unpack how artwork biographies are rewritten through digitization. And we might now ask whether museums are rewriting artist biographies using generative AI, whether this is a more life-affirming Van Gogh or a Dalí whose identity as an entertainer is emphasized. So coming to our final slide now, we can certainly see the appeal of experimenting with generative AI at the museum visitor interface. Dalí and Bonjour Vincent can produce an affective resonance for viewers through personalized and participatory engagement. And in the promotional materials surrounding these projects, there is a real emphasis on no two interactions with the digital doubles being the same. And participation becomes really heightened when one considers the fact that visitors become a part of the machine learning process with their interactions used to further train the algorithm. And so the iterative cycle continues, and it also becomes a data collection point that can inform future museum exhibits because it highlights what museum visitors want to know more about. So there's much potential in generative AI use at the museum visitor interface, and it's really our hope that as this technology unfolds, the museum takes it steps further beyond the art historical approach and starts to self-reflexively communicate some of the technical operations of generative AI. And we think that rather than impeding this kind of magic of the digital double, it could instead unveil the magic of human-machine entanglement in world building.